Last week, we were finishing up the shaping process for the first planks we built after the glue failure. Both of these required a graving piece to remove defects we couldn't otherwise cut around. These went into our heating boxes to cure up, and the next morning, Kira and I headed out of town to a friend's wedding. While I was away, Steve and the crew got set up to put these new planks on the boat, but when they did, these graving pieces failed and fell out with very little force. But the scarf joints were perfect. The situation was the same on both the starboard and port side strakes, so that meant we had a whole new glue problem to figure out. Just before Jordan left, after spending 3 weeks with us in the boatyard, he made us 3 sets of 8-to-1 and 10-to-1 graving pieces. We will use these to test a few epoxies that we thought might be the fix to our latest glue issues.
What I'll do is I'll just cut these out with the bandsaw and then do them really slowly, really fine, and then we know the piece that's come out goes straight back in that hole, and we just glue them straight in. Like, no need to faff around making them pretty.
So Jordan has now been our longest term volunteer that we've ever had. He came for 1 week, and 1 week became 2 weeks, and 2 weeks became 3 weeks, and now he's about ready to go. But it's been great having him, and Jordan has been here for our biggest and most stressful failures to date. So we had some real catastrophic glue issues that we've been battling with, and just about every day that Jordan's been here, we've woken up in the morning with a game plan, and by lunchtime that game plan is totally out the window. So he's been here for definitely one of the more trying times on the Arabella project so far. We can let him tell you a little more about that.
It's been challenging and exciting at the same time. Real heartbreaking times when planks failed and glue joints didn't work, but all part of the experience, which I've loved. Enjoyed every minute. It's been great getting to know the guys and Arabella, and I'd definitely love to come back at some point, if not before the launch. Yeah, thank you guys both for the time and experience.
Boy, oh boy, have we had a rough few weeks here in the Arabella boatyard. So our issues started off with some bad glue. So Ross came back to give us a hand for a week, and we were really jazzed to get back to planking. And we scarfed up another oak plank, and we realized when we cut the offcuts from that plank and cut it down to size that they were just breaking right along the glue lines, and something was wrong. And we haven't had that happen before. And what we realized is that the glue had expired. Time had just gotten away from us, and the glue was almost 2 years old, and Resorcinol has about a 1-year shelf life, give or take. So the glue had gone bunk. The temperature had also dropped a bit. So we ordered more glue, and we figured we needed to find a way to heat up the planks and make sure that they stayed above temperature even on the cold nights. So we tackled that, and we had Jordan here, and he dove into a bunch of that with us. We got that all situated. We got the plank scarfed up, and we're like, yeah, I think we are good to go. Alex and Kira took off and went up to Maine for the weekend for a friend's wedding. And while they were gone, we just got sucker punched left and right trying to put these planks on. At least that's what it felt like. So our biggest issue were these graving pieces. So we cut these to scarf into the edge of the plank, and they fix a defect. In this case, there was a knot there. And as you can see, it just broke right off. We have almost no wood that's being torn. It's breaking right along the glue line, except for this tiny little piece. So these were failing with not much force at all, and that's not something that we have had happen at all up to this point. All of the glue lines up until now that we've tested have broken like this. And the glue line is actually here. So it didn't even break on the glue line, the timber let go. And that's really what we want to see. And that's what's been happening with the scarfs. So when we went to bend the planks on the boat and the graving pieces on the edge all blew off, I was really confused and I didn't know what happened because it was the same process, it was the same glue, it was the same boxes for the scarf joints, and the scarf joints seemed absolutely fine. And Jordan, who's been here helping us out, he's the one that realized when we were taking the clamps off of the graving pieces, the clamps were a lot looser than we initially put them on. And our theory is that the planks shrunk a little bit widthwise in those heat boxes that we made, because it's basically a mini oven, and that shrinking was enough for us to lose clamping pressure on those graving pieces. And Resorcinol, it really needs high clamping pressure. So if we lose that clamping pressure, we're going to lose that good glue joint with the Resorcinol. Now when we're doing the scarf joints, we're only clamping the thickness of the plank. It's only 1.5 inches, and wood moves proportionally. So even if that does shrink a little bit in the 24 hours, the chances of that 1.5 inches moving enough for those clamps to loosen is really, really low. Where when we're clamping a 6 or 7 or 8 inch wide plank, that's a different story. So that wood, since it moves proportionately, that wide plank is going to shrink that much more in the same amount of time, and we're going to lose that much more clamping pressure. So we thought about trying to rig something to keep applying the pressure overnight or to open the boxes, but that seems kind of sketchy. How do you figure out exactly what time to do that? And we're letting all the heat out, and do we really want to be up every 2 hours all night giving clamps a crank? So what we've elected to do is do some test runs with some epoxy. Epoxy doesn't need the high clamping pressure that Resorcinol does, so if that plank shrinks a little bit, it should be okay. So we did some test runs with the epoxy, and let's go put those through a bit of a torture test and see if that fared better on those wide planks and on those graving pieces than the Resorcinol did. And if it did, we'll probably continue to glue all of the scarfs with the Resorcinol since we're not having any issues there, and we'll just switch over to using the epoxy just for the graving pieces.
Jamestown sent us a few different epoxies they thought might work for our applications.
Guy said it was the consistency, honey. He wasn't really kidding. I like squeezing too tight, but also make sure they don't just fall off.
Mm-hmm.
Warm this stuff up a little more in the future. Really good to come out. One of the great things about gluing the planks up and then cutting them out is we get these fantastic offcuts from every single scarf joint, and we get to test them and break them, one from either side of the plank, which has been really reassuring for us so far to make sure that all the scarf joints on the boat are good. So usually we just take these outside and jump on them and rip them around a bit, and as long as they don't break and things seem good, we're going to do it in a little more controlled fashion here. So what we're going to do is shove it underneath the cribbing for the boat here and put it on a bottle jack, and just going to jack that up until something breaks. And we got another one to test as well, and then we'll go grab the graving pieces that we did earlier and break those as well. That's it. Crib it up and keep going. That's a good sign though. We're breaking underneath.
Yeah.
So I'm happy with that one. It broke where it was underneath the cribbing, and actually where the plank broke, not where the scarf was. So we got another one here to try, and we'll actually stick the scarf underneath this time and see if we can put a little more pressure right on the glue joint and see if this one does the same thing. But we bent that way farther than it's ever going to bend on the plank on the boat, and the glue line didn't budge at all. And that's what we're looking for. And when we did the graving pieces, they didn't even get close to that level of bend before they just popped right off. You ready?
Nothing on the glue line again.
Nothing on the glue line. So I feel really great about these scarves.
Yeah, I think the scarves.
The scarves seem bomber. I mean, we were just going on the gentle bend here around the hull, and we were popping the graving pieces off. And this was a hell of a lot more twist and force than that. So yeah, I think we can still keep gluing the scarves with the Resorcinol. I really think it's just losing the clamping pressure on the Resorcinol overnight with those wide clamps in the graving pieces.
Yep, fully agreed.
So let's grab some of those epoxy glue ups and give those a test drive and see what happens. Oh, they're nice and warm. Look at that, clamp's like falling off. Oh, you're good. You don't have to run away. Just don't look awkward. Epoxy does not like high clamping pressure. It actually can't have very high clamping pressure. So we just snugged these up when we put them in yesterday, but they were definitely not this loose. So these clamps now they're just about falling off. And I think that's the big issue that we had with the Resorcinol, is that this plank just shrunk a little bit and we lost that clamping pressure. So hopefully that shouldn't really bother the epoxy. The epoxy really should only just have to be almost touching, just really light clamping pressure. Before we dive into breaking these epoxy samples, we want to give a little bit of credit where credit is due. And I'm sure a bunch of you have noticed the Total Boat logos on some of our clothes and the Jamestown banner hanging in the boathouse. And although we aren't officially sponsored by Jamestown, they don't write us checks or anything like that. We do have a great working relationship with them, and anytime we have a question or we need something, they help us source it, and they hook us up with a bunch of paint and varnish and epoxy and all that on the house. And they're doing that for a lot of different boat building channels and whatnot, which is really cool. So when we had the issues with the graving pieces, we called Jamestown's tech support, and we kind of picked their brains and talked to them about our issues, and they concurred that it could be due to the plank shrinking and that epoxy might be a solution to that. So we asked them if they could send us kind of a smattering of different epoxies that we could test and see what worked well with the oak and what worked with the graving pieces. And they sent us three kinds of their epoxy. So they sent us their Thixo Flex and their Thixo and their Fast Set. And we didn't try the Fast Set for this because we only had the 3 heat boxes, but we did the Thixo and we did the Flex. And not only did they send us some of their epoxy, they also sent us some West Systems G-Flex to try. And personally, I think this is really big of Jamestown. Like, they could have just sent us their stuff, but instead they sent us their stuff, and they sent us West Systems as well. And Jamestown distributes West Systems, but it is in a lot of ways kind of in competition with their Total Boat epoxy line. And I think that showed a lot of courage on their part to send it to us on the house and have us do side-by-side test samples with their epoxy and show it to all of you on YouTube. So it's been one of the great things about working with Jamestown is whether we want to use their stuff or we want to use somebody else's, it's totally cool, and they are just happy to support and happy to see a little bit of their project or their product going into Arabella. So enough about that, and let's dive into breaking some of these pieces. Could I get one more 8? Please and thank you. No way.
We're gonna pick up the boat. Yeah, you're just...
Oh, I heard a crack. I'm like a little scared.
Ooh. That's crazy. Go ahead.
That's way more than the Resorcinol graving pieces we're gonna hold. Afraid this is wow. Check mark next to Thixo.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say that is.
I mean, we were pushing right on the edge of the glue line there, and none of that seemed to budge at all. We actually split in 2 different places in the plank.
Yep. Sounds pretty good. Yep. Right down the middle.
Yeah, and you can see I wasn't even the glue lines back here.
Yeah.
So I was all of that force was just on that little graving piece glued on. I mean, we were bending the 6x6.
Yeah.
I think Thixo passes. Try some G-Flex. Good job.
I'd say that lasted too. Nowhere near the glue line.
No, none of them are.
Yeah.
All right, do you think we even need to try the other G-Flex?
No.
We just try the flex.
Yeah, they seem to be doing pretty well. Curious to see the flex. Oh, that one's pretty good.
That was good. Yeah, it split the glue line. Top half of the glue line came off, but it was not the glue line at all that broke in any of these. I feel good about the epoxy.
Impressive. That is very impressive. Wow. Next week, we step back into the prop shaft assembly for a moment to install a Delrin liner into the stern post. Then, Arabella will finally get her next 2 planks and the first of her copper rivets.
Hey there, Tim Malone from Lakeville, Minnesota, just south of the Twin Cities. I've been the volunteer this week, these last 5 days, helping out in little ways, big ways, any way that I can. Been watching this project for more than a year and fell in love with it at first sight. I'm a man who grew up loving working with tools, working with wood, and then at age 13, the family got a sailboat and I was hooked. So this project, putting that all together, working with the tools, and the smell of the wood here in the shop is incredible. And this lovely lady behind me, it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to help out here. Just so you guys know, I'll be chilling a bottle of champagne. So the day that she finally launches and you two are out to sea, I'll celebrate it back at home in Minnesota for you. And can't wait to see what all your great adventures will be. Thanks again for this week. See y'all.